space robot combat scene in general by looking at key teams and bots. I'm your host Luke, and with me today is Dan.
Hi.
And our special guest, Victor, or Matt.
Hi, I'm a Roomba with a knife. You can call me Matt.
Well,
And today we're covering the notable bots of Series 3, and boy, what a lineup we have today.
Yeah, we have some of the most underrated
yes.
machines in Series 3, and we have some machines that you kind of wish they weren't notable with their performances.
Oh boy. Yeah,
Yes,
Series 3 is... Let's just say that Series 3 is the one we had the hardest time we've had so far deciding who was going to be in the Shitbots episode.
Well, I mean, an accurate Shitbots Series 3 is probably about 5 parts long, but no, today we are covering notable bots. It's an array of strange semi-finalists, weird dropouts, and just a bunch of oddballs,
Yeah,
really.
some of the biggest upsets of the series are going to be featured. We're going to be featuring some of the more hilarious breakdowns and completely stupid performances that somehow ended up with some of these robots going far further than they had any right to.
Absolutely.
That's one way of putting it, I think. The other way of putting it is just why.
Yep, it's going to be the highs and the lows of the middle of the road of Series 3. It's mostly lows, but there's a few high spots in there.
To be fair, it's Series 3, so those lows are pretty much in the middle of the road anyway.
Yeah. Yep, it's pretty hard to go much lower than the absolute bottom of the barrel, which some of the machines this series were.
Yes, we'll start with one of the higher highs in the form of Gravedigger.
Ironically, a robot that was particularly high for its own individual performances, but the rest of the heat was... oh boy.
Oh boy, yes. Gravedigger is one of my favourites from Series 3, which is kind of a weird...
Really?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like outside of the obvious ones like Razor and Hypnodisc and Chaos 2 and all that,
Yeah,
it's like it's just like a competently made Cassius clone.
it was a very simple and effective design. It was very appealing on the eyes. It stuck to its gimmick and it did it well. It made it just far more appealing than, a cheese wedge with a lifter ever had any right to be.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, whenever I look at Gravedigger, I do think Cassius clone, but I think Cassius with all of the charm removed. It's the most utilitarian looking robot I've ever seen.
Yeah, but it worked better.
It's simple and it's effective. That's all it needs to be. It's got personality despite doing the bare minimum.
Yeah. Also, it's from Norwich, so I'm biased.
Yes, I'm also slightly biased for Norwich.
Yeah.
I mean, its first few battles kind of show off how Gravedigger was successful in Series 3, because against Manic Mutant and Mortis, it's not particularly well driven, it's not particularly fast, but what it is a flipper, and in Series 3, that is absolutely all you need.
Yeah, it really struggled in pretty much all of its fights. It did not put on particularly impressive performances at all, but it just needed one good flip, and in Series 3, one good flip is going to be enough to beat the vast majority of the field.
Yeah. The Series 3, people hadn't really caught on to the whole Sreemech thing yet. Like, it had only just started appearing in Series 2, and only one robot could really do it.
Yeah, and I don't think the average person thinks that they're going to be imitating Cassius. Except for Gravedigger, obviously.
Yeah, which copied Cassius' homework entirely. And then, obviously, having a flipper becomes less of a relevant thing as you go further up, because more robots become able to self-right, unless you happen to be Firestorm, in which case none of your opponents can do it, and you're a bad robot because you don't help them up.
Boo this man! Boo this man for not helping Crasher Nasher.
let us not have inter-podcast rivalry, brothers. I mean, I won't deny Gravedigger's accomplishments. It demolishes. Well, not demolishes. It does beat Mortis, which at this point is still. I think by this point the show had given up on hyping it as the greatest of all time, but it was still a second-time semi-finalist.
At the very moment that Gravedigger had Mortis lifted up and thrown into the house robots, they still showed backstage shots of everybody celebrating Mortis's failures.
Yeah, well,
because they built them up as the bad guys.
Yeah, they'd gone from hyping Mortis up as the legendary robot that was the most dangerous thing there, and had switched to hyping it up as we're gonna make these people the bad guys because of a decision we made for them.
Mortis is the treasure island of Robot Wars.
And so its fight with Mortis is actually a pretty good one, and it's Heat Final worthy. In fact, I always forget that it wasn't the Heat Final, and the actual Heat Final of this episode is against the Dark Destroyer, which is a complete waste of a machine.
And yet somehow Dark Destroyer's actually got a relatively impressive record in its history of Robot Wars, despite the fact it's an utter shambles.
Yeah.
I mean, the great thing about this fight is Dark Destroyer's little dinky little lawnmower blade is leaving gouges in Gravedigger, which shows how thin Gravedigger's armor is. So thin that Shun can go through it like butter, and Mortis dents it. Mortis.
Yeah, and yeah, Gravedigger didn't have the best armor. Nothing really had great armor at this point.
Yeah, but it wasn't really in a position where it needed great armor. I mean, if the most dangerous weapon you face to your entire run is the little flicky axe of Mortis, or maybe Dark Destroyer's Waggler... Well, not Wagglers, it's a little bit early for Wagglers. Dark Destroyer's just the propeller of doom. You don't really need much armor.
That's a low-key downgrade, that one. The Dark Destroyer going from the lawnmower blade, which was shit, to the Wagglers, which were just completely
even
atrocious.
Worse.
I think you mean the lawnmower blade that invented the modern bar spinner, but
yeah, obviously, of course, yeah. No. To be fair, it had more than two. It was more than just like a single bar. It was two. Like the true inventor of the modern bar spinner is, of course, Little Fly.
So now we can confirm that Dark Destroyer is single-handedly responsible for Double Dutch's appearance in BattleBots this year. It's innovated the double blade design. Good job, Dark Destroyer.
Yeah, it did. And thank you for bringing us Double Dutch. And then we have so it makes it through to the semi-finals, and comes up against Steg, and we talked about this a bit in the Steg episode, and this is one of the more controversial fights we're going to be talking about today. There's quite a few of these in the episode today, actually, because it's a kind of a running thing of like, do you think Steg deserved to win this fight?
I do. I'm one of the people who thinks that Steg deserves to win. Gravedigger, it did have its moments. It did nearly get Steg over once, and it did outpush it for a little bit. But if you just look at it from a perspective of how long in the fight they spent in control, the amount of time that Steg was the better robot doesn't really get offset by Gravedigger getting one or two good attacks in that didn't actually finish it off. So I think if you go with damage, there wasn't any. Style, probably Gravedigger, but control and aggression would have gone to Steg easily. They were the far better machine in that category.
I can see the argument there. I personally, I think I said in the Steg episode, and I definitely think it right now. I do think that this should have been Gravedigger's fight. I'm
definitely undecided. I'm undecided because, as you said,
either way, it's a good one.
Steg does spend more. Steg does spend more time in control, but I mean, Gravedigger does come very close to killing them at least twice. The first flip, Steg is basically saved by Matilda. But I mean, I can easily see why Steg got the thing. I mean, that just by virtue of the stabbing the tail in. I mean, damage counted for a lot back then, so. I don't think we should spend too long on on Gravedigger's future incarnations. Series 4 was probably the most promising they ever were. It promised to be a very powerful front hinge flipper. The only thing is, they designed it to be so powerful that in testing, the flipping arm completely bent, and they basically entered as a wedge, which might have been fine, but they were in a melee against Thermidor and Chronic.
Yeah, and Chronic at this point wasn't very good. It was a far cry from what it would eventually become.
Long after Robot Wars had ended, really.
Yeah. But it was the Thermidor 2 was the one to watch. I think,
there
in
was
this
very
case,
much
and,
Thermidor's breakout season, and Gravedigger. If they had faced pretty much anything other than a powerful flipper, I feel like even with the issues with the front hinge flipper, they probably still could have made the heat final.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance of that.
I think they need a pretty forgiving heat for that. Maybe something like mousetraps.
Yeah. The interesting thing here is that it was seeded 13th. Do you agree with that seeding?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not to. There were 16 semi-finalists and they went out in the first round. 13 is a fair enough spot for it. Especially if you're going to take robots like Razor and immediately just jump them up the pack because they're Razor. Well, because they had the World Championships to go off. With the Behemoth screwed
If you're going to put Behemoth at 6 for being second place in World Championships.
And should have won.
Wow.
But that's another argument entirely.
Ooh. It's going to be a long time before we get to properly discuss that one.
Yes.
We're going to get all the way to Series 5 for that. But
Series 5 Gravedigger is really just a weird kind of anomaly. It's weird that it's still there. It's an axe and it dies pretty quickly.
Yeah, but again, it's only lost to Tornado, and it did at least. It showed promise at first, but just as the fight went on, the promise lasted about 15 or 20 seconds, and then it was just a case of Tornado doing as Tornado does and bossing the shit out of everything.
It did land land some hits, and those hits didn't do anything. Not any visible damage that we can see.
Yeah, but back in those days.
To be fair, the last thing about 15 to 20 seconds against Tornado before it just turns into another case of Tornado shoves you around the arena for 5 minutes and then into the pit is actually pretty good.
Yeah, except they didn't even last the entire fight or until Tornado just bossed them around and put them in the pit. They died before they even got that far. Very much a flash in the pan appearance in Series 5.
The weird thing about Gravedigger in this series is like it comes in with this whole axe setup. But the axe still sits flush with the wedge, so it could be used as a flipper. But unfortunately, it's got this little block on the front of the robot which stops the wedge working. And obviously, it's to stop things driving up the wedge and not being able to hit by the axe. But
yeah,
that just makes the robot worse. It would have probably done a whole lot better if it could have actually gotten under Tornado.
Yeah, but I think if they knew a ton about fixing their design flaws, they wouldn't have had the problem in the first place in Series 4 where immediately their weapon just bent itself out of a line and they couldn't use it. Something tells me that they're not the kind of precision engineers that would be competing for the championship, so I can excuse them for a little mistake like that, but...
Yeah. And this is a robot that actually has a 50-50 win-loss record. It wins 3 fights in Series 3, and then it loses to Steg, and then loses 2 more in the subsequent series.
Yeah,
and it doesn't enter Extreme, it doesn't enter any other side events, it just sort of
fades
disappears
into nothing.
Yeah, which is...
I can't honestly say I think we're much the worse for that, but I will. One last thing on Gravedigger, kudos for the cool paint job in 4 and 5. Livened it up a bit.
Yes, very good looking robot. In those series.
It made the robot seem a lot more like a legitimate threat, and then immediately it was not even slightly a threat.
Yeah, obviously that's the downside there. I like Gravedigger. It's a solid mid-tier robot. I think it could have gone fairly far if it had been given the victory over Steg.
Perhaps, but I don't think. But I must say I'm rather glad I didn't.
Then again, it probably if it had made it out the semis, it would have drawn Hypnodisc, and that would have been the end of that.
It would have been
spectacular.
See that armor it would have been a spectacular way to go, though.
True. It would have been a good episode.
All right. Moving on to another strange semi-finalist, Blade.
Blade.
It's an odd little thing. It's got pretty thick armor. I'll give it that. It shrugs off a shunt blow pretty well, and it's armed with a lawnmower
It's
blade.
impressively fast and maneuverable. It doesn't really have any issues getting across the arena, which is a common recurring trend among Series 3 robots, even ones that made it far.
Yeah, you can excuse the lawnmower blade because I mean it's no one's built a spinner before now.
Yeah, Blade is single-handedly responsible for Minotaur. They're the predecessor of the drum spinner. Blade.
Obviously, yes.
Blade is obviously the only reason drum spinners exist. They're trendsetters. That's why they're such a notable robot in Series 3.
Well,
Indeed.
Well, and we can also blame Blade for the vertical dominance. It's all their fault.
Yeah. So Blade's career begins with a fight with the equally boringly named Spike.
Spike, which looks kind of like a Junji Ito monster more than a robot.
Yeah, that looks like something that's going to get beaten up by a Kamen Rider.
This match has some stunning damage from Blade in what is easily Series 3 best destruction fight.
Yeah, it's very much a case of weapons being a construct, because Spike has this wonderful spike that's about a couple inches too high to even go even slightly close to Blade.
Yes.
Whereas Blade just rear ends its own ass into Spike the entire time instead of trying to go on with the lawnmower blade. So, truly a clinic on how to put on an exciting and damaging fight. Really cements Blade's status as a legend of the sport.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You know, you can see why Blade made drum spinners become, you know, the most iconic weapon of modern day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it actually. It does win this fight fairly convincingly, even if the pitting it makes isn't
with
counted.
a little bit of help from the House Robots, admittedly. But then they did all the work to get him in there, so credit to them for that.
Yeah.
A much more interesting fight is the fight against Agent Orange, because this is a fight Blade is quite close to losing.
I think quite close is an
it's
understatement.
near victim of the Avida Spike.
If the House Robots didn't get involved, that was Agent Orange's fight to win.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's kind of a shame, really, because Agent Orange isn't a terrible robot. I think
the clamp was actually quite good. It got a hold of Blade, it kept it there, and it was able to use the axe once it got the clamp on. It wasn't particularly damaging, but it was a visually impressive for the judges kind of design, and you know, it got a split decision. So it's not like it was a bad performance, and I can understand making an argument for Agent Orange advancing to the Heat final, which it could have even won because Agrabot is a mess.
Agrabot. Oh boy, yeah. This is the part where we will be talking about Agrabot in a bit more detail later on, but it goes into this is the point where Blade wins the heat, which it really had no business doing. This was clearly meant to be Razor's victory, and then Razor shat itself. I
think we should save that for the exciting Agrabot section.
Yes,
that is fair.
I have this fight listed down in my notes as just a sad contest.
Yeah,
that is a very good way to describe it.
Yes. Onwards from that, they go into the semi-final. We've covered this before, obviously. Bodmin dismisses it rather easily, which I mean, it's a wedge going up against Blade.
we covered it in our very first episode, which is a bit shit. So I think we can afford to give it a little more attention.
Yeah, I think despite how hilariously small the lifter on Beast of Bodmin is, it still did its job. It nearly got them over the first time, and then later on in the fight, it was just Blade offered nothing that fight. And it showed that just being a good, solid wedge in that era was still enough for Roadblock Beast of Bodmin to just get its wins.
Bodmin's not even that solid.
No, Bodmin's wedge
Trisha went through it like butter.
Well, it's solid in terms of design and driving.
Yeah.
Material-wise,
it's not a great wedge bot. I'll say that for it.
Yeah, it looks less like the Beast of Bodmin and more like a bag of Doritos has been spilled over the robot.
Yeah, this is named after that mysterious, supposedly existing big cat.
Yeah, I think Big Cat is a bit of an overestimation for Beast of Bodmin's performance. I think they maybe should have chosen something a little more friendly.
Yeah, what they should have done is just kept Roadblock. But
on the bright side, they had the little winking, which was easily the best part of Beast of Bodmin.
That is true. That is very true. I did like the winking, but yeah, I mean, this fight is really, really easy for Beast of Bodmin, it's something that Beast of Bodmin has been kind of struggling up to this point. It wasn't as dominant as it could have been and as it was in previous years, and then it goes up against Blade, and it's just like it becomes really apparent as just how much Blade was not going to win this heat if everything.
It's kind of astounding to think how close Beast of Bodmin even came to making 3 consecutive grand finals, thanks to the likes of Blade.
Yeah, and then Blade has an actual year of ground clearance. Like, it's up there with Killertron for robots which just have too much space.
Well, they don't need a
them.
feeder wedge for that mighty, mighty drum spinner. They just need to go straight into it.
That is true. Yeah, that is very true.
Blade is a very early series bot. It's one that can boddle along, push a bot about, has an attempt at a weapon.
An attempt was made, and I think that is the perfect summary for the entire performance of Blade.
Yes,
it had a sequel robot. It was going to be followed up in series 4 by Blade's big brother, which is spelt terribly. But that never materialized.
Yeah, instead we got Big Brother in general, which was just far better.
Yeah. I'll take that one. I'll take that over Blade getting a sequel, and that moves us cleanly away from terrible. Well, it's not terrible, but it's not great.
Yes.
And onto a robot that was actually surprisingly good, and that was Pitbull.
Yeah, Pitbull is a robot that I think really gets very, very underrated in terms of Series 3. They had a fantastic run. Their fights, I'm not going to say they're comprehensive wins, because they weren't, but they put on good performances against good bots, and somehow they put on awful performances against awful bots.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's fight against something. There's not a lot to say there, really.
Yeah, there is something to say though, because there's a quote on the wiki. There's apparently from the Pitbull website, which is like, after a tense wait, the time had come for Pitbull's first battle. We'd examined something and didn't think we could damage it with the jaws.
That's a valid point.
Apparently the wheels are made from thick gas bottles and the electronics box was thick steel. So, to be fair, something for us as lightly armoured as it looked.
It does explain where all the weight went in something so spindly looking.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, they actually had some pretty solid armour around the vital bits. And then
the weapon mechanism just self-destructed the entire machine in one hit.
It did that, and then it did that in the second year as well.
Yeah, and then it did it again against Widow's Revenge in Series 5. It just sort of kept consistently dying on its own accord.
Oh, something. What a machine.
Mr. Dig is truly the pioneer of our sport.
Oh, yeah. And then it has this weird limp fight with Technophobic that it's not really that exciting until Technophobic just fucking explodes.
Well, at one point, Technophobic had Pitbull lifted up and was just a couple of inches away from getting Pitbull over and winning the fight. It was surprisingly, Pitbull was up against it at first, but then it just...
Well, the thing is, even if it had managed to win the fight, the part where it burst into flames afterwards would have meant that they had to reinstate Pitbull anyway.
Well,
So-
I don't think they would
could
have
fix that
ended
kind
up
of thing.
being exploded on fire if they hadn't been dumped on the flame pit by Pitbull if they had won the fight by that point.
Fairly true, yeah.
I mean, its fight against Behemoth is pretty infamous for being a case of the floor spikes ending something.
And I think that's probably why Pitbull is so underrated, because...
Yeah, but then when you consider the fight up until that point, outside of the one flip that got Pitbull over when the house robot self-righted it, it did have grips on Behemoth and it was pushing it around the arena. It could have gone to a split decision with the judges. It could have won. It very much could have won that fight without the spike.
Yeah, obviously the thing is that people remember it as yet another case of Behemoth underperforming.
Yeah, I think people sort of pinpointed as the beginning of Behemoth's just consistent awful luck. I mean, in Series 2, you can sort of put its elimination down to the design flaw, but Series 3, it's just all... That's when everything went from bad to worse for Behemoth.
And I think it's a case of being the robot that Behemoth lost to due to a floor spike that kind of brands Pitbull as an unworthy semi-finalist. And
yeah, but at that point you kind of can say
underrated.
That Pitbull was an unworthy semi-finalist because Technophobic nearly had them and something killed itself.
Sure, I'm talking about kind of perspective. Like Pitbull ends up being perceived as this, and thus gets underrated as a robot. When, as we say, it was doing very well against Behemoth, and does do very well against an arguably superior robot in Firestorm.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say that Firestorm being better than Behemoth in Series 3 is arguable. It just is.
I think in Series 3 you could say that
Series
Behemoth
3
was better than Firestorm, but even still, Firestorm was impressive for its time.
But I mean, in both fights, Pitbull puts on a great performance, and especially against Firestorm, where it is ironically a victim of a spiking.
Yeah, for most of the fight, it had Firestorm clamped. It was getting underneath it. Its front ground clearance was actually fantastic. It was getting under pretty much everything over the course of the series. And it was one of the few robots that managed to really get under Firestorm. They're not a robot that's easily gotten under throughout the entire series.
I think this fight kind of shows just how unbalanced the spikes were, because Pitbull's a victim of spikes twice, but in the first spike attack, the spikes keep on firing for about 10, 15 seconds.
And it does nothing to Pitbull,
They're so unbalanced.
which is impressive enough to its inner stability, because a lot of robots just died from being hit by the spikes, but Pitbull was there taking shot after shot after shot and just shrugged it off.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising that Firestorm didn't do more, because it does in its next fight against Panic Attack. Panic Attack goes over the spikes and Firestorm dives across half the arena to get under.
Yeah, but then obviously that's kind of the end of. I mean, it has the part where it breaks Killalot's hydraulic lines and just Killalot pisses all over the floor. Yeah, the house robot attacks are always good. Like there's always something entertaining about watching these robots that are a fraction of the weight of these house robots just go and attack them. And there's like pretty much every robot that was able to do it regularly got some level of infamy or fame for it. Like Panic Attack is always remembered trying to topple Killalot into the pit.
There's another thing we didn't mention with Gravedigger. Gravedigger went after the house robots in its fights.
Yeah, Gravedigger also got a flip on Matilda, becoming
very foolish.
One of about 60 or so.
They are not someone who should be taking on the house robots. My one lasting memory of Pitbull is the fact that its driver looks suspiciously like Football Manager Gary Monk.
Fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
So moving on from two semi-finalists to a bot that very easily could have been a semi-finalist if things had played out in a certain way, Ultor and Huboy. I always forget Ultor has a rear lifter. I always forget.
Oh yeah. Well, it's an early Robot Wars robot. It has to have a front and a back weapon.
Of course.
It has to have at least 7 weapons, each of which are about as effective as wet paper towels.
Yes.
That's one way of summing up the.
You joke, but Ultor was. Oh god, watching Ultor's fights is like. It's like watching...
running sandpaper down your eyes.
Yes. I was going to say it's like watching Mount Everest melt.
It's not very exciting. That's for yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you consider its first fight up against the mighty Flipper, who wasn't a flipper at all. It was a pathetic little spring-loaded spike. I don't know where the name comes from.
Just as imaginatively named as Blade and Spike.
If I remember,
even worse because it's not the fucking weapon that it's got.
I think it was supposed to be named that because it looked like a fish, which it didn't. But whatever, we won't get into it.
I mean,
it's a future podcast. Trust me.
Surprisingly fast for a Series 3 robot. Flipper was actually hilariously maneuverable and fast. It just as most robots did for the time, it just died on its own accord.
Yeah, and then Ultor gets itself flipped over by the arena spike.
I mean, yeah. There is one amusing thing in this fight against Flipper where Shuntax comes down crashing through Flipper with a mighty thud, and then when Ultor launches its own attack on Matilda, the sound editors put in a little dink.
I always love the comparisons between like early series Axe bots and shunts acts from series 3 to 4,
Yeah.
because it's just like my favorite one is still Mortis on Crusader 2.
It's just sort of gently
just,
pecking it,
lightly
then Shunt
tapping
comes
it,
in and it's just
Shunt
suddenly a top panel of armor comes off.
just rips a fucking hole in it. It's great.
So Ultor moved on
Is
to
it-
facing Bumblebot next, which I have listed down as just disaster and nothing else.
My own notes read miserable fight. The most notable thing about this fight is the pre-fight banter where Philip is going, Bumblebot has the bigger chopper, and War's team captain goes, not the size but how it's used.
Yeah.
Oh, penis joke.
Yep. And I don't like to imagine that looking at a man called Barnaby Golder. I don't want to see a man called Barnaby Golder talk about the size of his pecker.
Hey, and they said Comedy Central had the good ones, eh?
Yeah, and then ultimately Bumblebot becomes another in the long line of robots that gets castrated by the house robots. In this case, it was Dead Metal rather than Killalong.
Yeah, I think the impressive thing about this fight is the fact that Bumblebot was there in the first place.
Yeah. Props for trying.
Yeah,
You made it to the
tried.
second round in Series 3, which isn't much of a feat because it simply says your robot was able to drive.
I mean, hey,
But you tried, and that's what counts.
that puts you in the top.
Hey, you
that
can't
puts you in the
knock a
top
robot.
50% of robots, all right?
Yeah, you can't knock a robot just for saying all it can do is drive forwards in Series 3, because there's a lot of them that can't.
Yep.
Like, the Series 1 Dreadnought, which couldn't drive forward without catching fire, would legitimately be in the top half of Series 3.
And we'll be able to talk later on about how Dreadnought still continues to just break down at random as we get into talk of Dreadnought facing off against Trident later on in this episode.
Oh, boy.
But after that horrendous fight, we move on to Ultor's clash with future grand finalist Big Brother, and this is
Ooh.
quite a close one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because this is a fight where Ultor wins, according to the show, at least.
And I think deservedly
and-
so as well. I think, having rewatched the fight,
Yeah.
I think they did deserve to win that fight, and I don't think it was a controversial enough judge's decision to even really be able to pass it off as, oh, we can't stay here any longer, we have to go.
The damage, as minor as it was, the Big Brother losing their flail, it's still damage. Ultor
Yeah, it's
mostly
more
wins the
than-
Battle of the Wedges.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that a lot of Big Brother's pushing power came from reversing into Ultor.
Yeah.
It didn't go front on, it was reversing for most of the fight.
Yeah, that's the only times when they're on top.
Yeah, but I can kind of see where the argument for Big Brother comes from.
They did have some good pushing for a lot of the fight, but I think in the greater
Yeah.
picture, Ultor accomplished more.
Yeah, well, ultimately it ends up being that Ultor did not book a room in the hotel for the
Yeah,
Series 3 semi-finals.
They had nondescript work commitments, so I think it might be a case of them. They didn't think they'd go this far, so they didn't book enough time off work. But ultimately, they had to withdraw, and for TV's sake, they say that Big Brother should have won. But no, they have to withdraw.
Yes, but now here's the interesting caveat.
Oh,
If Ultor had continued, how would they have done in the semi-final against Mace 2?
that's not interesting.
Could Mace 2 get underneath
Yes!
Ultor and actually flip it with the size of Ultor? Could it be?
Mate, they could
easily
win with
lifted
the
by
flail.
Mace?
It's not an interesting fight.
I mean, Ultor didn't break down. It was reliable. It moved. I don't think it would be that easy for Mace.
The
I'm sure this will
amazing
get
thing
under at
is
some
that
point. They could
the amazing
go on.
the amazing thing about this is of course that Ultor is one of the few robots ever to be
Oh, yeah.
undefeated.
Yeah, up there with Tentamushi, who's
there.
also undefeated in Robot Wars from the same series.
Up there with
And of course,
Which is an actually interesting caveat, not
Yes.
Ultor potentially facing Mace in the semi-final.
yes.
and of course, we can't forget that Ultor had a starring role in the Game Boy Color game Robot Wars Metal Mayhem.
Yeah, I assume just because of its color scheme and paint job, which looks suspiciously like an old man is just sort of judging me. I feel like Ultor is judging me as it fights.
Yeah.
Probably because I'm watching Ultor with my own decision.
Ultor stands
the
as
thing
the
is,
silent
obviously-
witness in the trial of humanity.
The roster for this game is the roster for this game is fairly infamous. But you've got ones that you kind of expect to be there. You've got Chaos 2, Behemoth, Big Cheese, Firestorm, Deator, Panic Attack, maybe Pussycat, but that mostly became famous later on, and the same could be said for Thermidor and Exterminator, and Scutter's Revenge to a lesser extent. But then you have Terminal Ferocity, Sir Chromalot, Ultor, obviously we mentioned, we have Crasher Nasher, Dundee, and the Purple Predator.
But how does it compare to the Robot Wars board game with Bolt from the Blue and Destructibubble?
Toa, I think you just read out the actual the list of robots we're going to cover in Shitbots of Series 3 there. Thanks for spoiling it.
So some of those robots will be in our next episode.
Yes. I think so. Moving on from Ultor onto a robot built by a former Grand Champion with Kevin Pritchard and Evil Weevil.
The legend, the man, the myth, the Weevil of gods.
Yeah,
Quite possibly the most captivating and most dominant run by any semi-finalist I think we've ever seen in Robot Wars.
Evil Weevil is basically budget Panic Attack.
I think budget Panic Attack is an insult to Panic Attack.
I mean, maybe not
I
Series
think a
3
budget
Panic Attack
would do a little bit more convincing work than Evil Weevil did.
I mean, maybe not Series 3 Panic Attack, let's be real here.
Yeah. But Series 3 Panic Attack might do something interesting if when they eventually stop spinning around the arena for 2 seconds. But,
I mean, Evil Weevil had some pretty interesting armour, I'll give it that. It had ballistic fiberglass and Kevlar with Velcro on to snag chainsaws, which is...
That's an entanglement device. That's illegal in this series.
Oh, no. Yeah, they could have ruined Hypnodisc's disc in the semi-finals.
Oh yeah, if they'd met Tornado in Series 5, it would have been over.
Evil Weevil was the original spinner killer.
I mean, we'll get to its encounter. Its first fight is against the omnidirectional Triterabot. It's genuinely having trouble here. It's getting stuck on walls. Triterabot's stabbing in.
Yeah, and it only gets the win once Triterabot just suddenly its motors burn out and everything just falls apart. Also, I think the part of this fight that screws me off the most is that at the start, Evil Weevil very clearly got stuck on the wall, and the editing just doesn't show how they got off. Just suddenly 5 seconds later, Evil Weevil's in the middle of the arena completely fine.
This is an amazing start for Evil Weevil where it can't beat.
Yeah,
the fight even has an amazing end because they go for a pit attempt, miss, and then just leave the house robots to it.
I think the more impressive thing about all of this is the fact that Evil Weevil is, he's got those forks that are low to the ground, it can lift things up, and Triterabot's ground clearance is comparable to the Burj Khalifa. And yet somehow, they don't even find a way to get underneath it.
It's a baffling fight, and it's even worse as its encounter with Flip Flop Fly, which is
this is only the start of Evil Weevil's fantastic run.
Oh god.
Yeah, it's a miserable fight, and at one point the house robot starts swarming in on Fly, who is still mobile. And Jonathan Pierce is like, the fact that the house robots swarm in means they must be immobilized, but no, they need to salvage something from this heat. Something.
But that's to be expected.
The house robots swarming in means fuck all. It just means they're fucking bored.
I'm pretty sure that if I held a hammer, I could probably hit harder than Flip Flop Fly could. And I'm saying that in the case of if my arm was broken while I was doing it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you sort of flailed your body about a bit, the arm would just sort of flap around and probably would actually potentially do some damage.
Honestly,
like that.
if you managed to even land a hit on Evil Weevil, you would probably be doing better than Flip Flop Fly.
Yeah.
Oh god, yes. And then it goes up against Panzer in the heat final.
Fight of the century.
Panzer
Oh yes,
Panzer
legendary.
enters the arena broken. It's not working. It's
Once
Yeah.
we get, I personally feel like Evil Weevil was robbed on Nick's top 15 fights of season 3.
no,
This
absolutely.
Classic with
It was
Panzer.
robbed not being at number 1 of the ultimate.
The fact it
countdown.
wasn't
Let's be
even in the
real.
top 15, let alone the top 5, where I think it perfectly deserves to be, it offends me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that's Nick. His countdowns are a
Yeah,
bit
that's
weird
Nick
like
for
that.
you. He's got awful taste.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Well, that's one episode.
Doesn't believe in the power of the Weevil.
That's one episode being left
Yeah.
on private.
Yeah,
Weevil.
he's never gonna let us anybody watch this.
Alas.
This is Nick's way. This is Nick's way of getting back at us Welsh. He hates us.
Alas.
He won't
hates
put
the
Evil
Welsh.
Weevil in his countdown.
Evil Weevil's end.
Yeah.
Evil Weevil comes to a end against Hypnodisc, and Weevil is not up to the task of confronting Hypnodisc. It doesn't have the control.
But amazingly, its loss is probably its best performance of the entire series, as it actually manages to hold up to Hypnodisc for a surprisingly long amount of time. Well, it's not its best performance of the series, because it was football champion, which we can talk about after.
I mean,
but,
I think all that needs to be said about all it needs to be said about its football run is it won despite not scoring a goal, which sums up the mediocrity of Evil Weevil perfectly.
Yeah, when your highlight is
Yeah.
winning football, it's...
Without winning a goal.
Yeah, with all the grace of a Harry Kane against Panama.
And the most exciting thing about the football event was that the ball got set on fire.
Yeah, and the fact that Matilda has probably scored more own goals than she's made saves.
I think in the case of Evil Weevil, it's impossible to forget the obvious comparison to Panic Attack. That is a shadow they cannot escape.
Yeah, they were doing
Yeah,
it
well,
for primary school kids, and
It doesn't help that Evil Weevil was captained by a guy that left the Panic Attack team and then went back and drove Panic Attack in Series 7.
did just as bad, really.
Pretty much. It had the misfortune to be in against Tough as Nails.
It had the misfortune.
Sep-
It had the misfortune of being Panic Attack after Series 5.
Yeah, that's pretty true.
Well, I think we should move on to a semi-finalist with an even more exciting run, an even more challenging array of opponents here. We should move on to Trident.
Oh, such a legendary robot here.
Trident is a very odd design. It's got these little triangular wheels set up this huge long
What
body.
purpose does that serve?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's
What
got
purpose
6
does-
wheels, but it's not invertible, and what are they even doing? They're just there. What was the intent?
Maybe they just wanted to
What
look
would do?
unique. I don't know.
This robot drives on fidget
They
spinners.
certainly
Yes.
looked unique. They seemed more like a metallic hermit crab.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It had a rather lackluster victory over Tunturan, and
Yeah,
Oh,
one
wow.
axe shot to the fiberglass armor, art, deco, who knows, and it
Art
immediately
mech.
killed it.
its fight against Victor is similarly.
Although I would say
Uninspiring.
that from Tunturan's performance that fight, it is probably the best Welsh machine in the series after Panic Attack and ahead of Evil Evil.
Yes.
It should be noted. It should be noted that that single axe blow that killed Tunturan also broke Trident's axe. So they managed to break their axe against a fiberglass shell, and
You can see
it
why
needed
they
to be
dumped the front
repaired.
plow to keep the fiberglass, because it was lethal.
I mean,
Oh, God, yeah.
Speaking of fighting fiberglass, the heat finals between it and Dreadnought, and
yeah, we're just gonna skip Victor 2 because fuck.
well, I
Victor
mean,
2.
there was really nothing to talk about there.
You know, Victor 2, at least it had a somewhat novel weapon, being a flail spinner. It had those big chunky angled wheels, very akin to the likes of Overdrive and Lockjaw nowadays. But
Big chunky wheels, flail spinner. This is sounding very familiar.
Victor 2, something else 2.
Getting to its fight against Dreadnought, though, one thing I do want to point out is Trident does land a few hits on Dreadnought's armour, and it barely scratches the fiberglass, so...
Yeah, but with Dreadnought's history of breaking down, that little bit of rattling to the internals is enough to put it in just forward drive for a couple of seconds before eventually it just gives up, and that's the end of it.
I think
Dreadnought breaks down again!
I think the most telling thing about this fight is this is the only fight I can think of where where the Heat winner is attacked unprovoked by the house robots. And it gets significantly damaged as well. Shunt absolutely mangles the shell of Trident.
Yeah, they just turn around and say, look, we don't like you because you're shiny. Fuck you.
Now, to me, with the way that the Heats were shown on television, there isn't really much logic behind having Chaos 2 up against Trident in the semi-finals. Aside from the fact I'm sure the producers just wanted Chaos 2 to get rid of Trident at the earliest convenience, which it did.
They want something to get rid of Trident early, and they don't want to risk anything hampering Chaos 2, which is obviously one of the shining stars of the series.
Now Trident's axe could get into the back of Chaos 2 and break the bottle.
Okay, but we've already seen Trident's axe repelled by plastic.
Hey, it was fiberglass.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
And Trident,
and it wasn't even a flat surface; it was rigid.
Damn, you're right.
Rugged.
The slopes would have
Rough.
thrown it off. I'm sure if they had a chance, they would have done what Kilohertz did.
This is such a really not even a challenge, is it? Chaos 2 just gets straight under it.
Well, yeah, it's a fight that
Flips
would
it
not
end
be
over
out
end.
of place on the very first fight of an episode.
It's
No, it wouldn't.
It's Trident's best fight just by virtue of having some nice Chaos 2 flips in.
It's Trident's best fight because Chaos 2 is there.
Trident's often seen as the worst semi-finalist ever, and yeah, I think I have to agree, but it's really just a victim of Series 3's uneven nature. Trident was the best robot in that heat somehow, whereas in other heats you have, as we'll soon cover, Firestorm and Facet in the same one, Hypnodisc and Berserk 2, and Chaos 2 and the Big Cheese. All of those had to share heat, while Trident got a heat to shine its dim star.
Yeah, like the biggest challenge that Trident faces on its way to the semi-finals is from fucking Dreadnought.
And I think it says a lot that Trident couldn't even qualify next time around. That was it. They were done. They never came back. They showed up as just a mere token novel pub quiz sect of Robot Wars history, as if anyone asks
Best
about
in
Robot Wars.
piss.
But if we had a Robot Wars pub quiz,
as was mentioned in the list of uneven setups of Series 3, because Series 3 didn't have seeding and really should have had seeding, we are moving on to Facet, which
far better. We finally get to a good robot after quite a poor run.
yeah, Facet, probably the best robot you're gonna have in this episode.
and obviously Matt, what does Facet look like?
Facet,
according to you.
Facet looks like a certain purple fucker from a certain movie, smiling deathly at you.
Yeah, Luke, I don't feel so good.
Yeah, Facet comes to us from Team GBH.
A team with pedigree, a team that have made a series semi-final, and honestly, we're quite unlucky to not be able to get into a grand final, because GBH was one of the best combat robots in Series 2.
I mean, Facet itself could have easily had if not a grand final, then at least a semi-final run. It could have easily gone deep.
I mean, Facet would have easily won Trident's heat, Blade's heat, Evil Weevil's heat.
I don't think it would have won Blade's heat if it didn't get drawn against Razor in round 1.
I mean,
because obviously Razor shits itself and dies in round 2.
Just some basic stats about Facet. It's got a flipper capable of lifting 500 kilograms, so easily enough to take out anything in the arena that isn't kilowatt. They reported that they were 48 miles an hour, but far more realistically, on their website they claim 20, and they are one of the few. I think robots.
20 is being generous.
Maybe. They had an onboard camera, which I think they're the first competitor to do so in Robot Wars.
One of the earliest. I think there are a couple of other really early ones that
Did
had them.
Plunderbird 1 have one in its various interchangeable
I-
pods?
It might
Feel
have.
like it probably
I think,
did.
I think I do remember that, yeah. I remember a weird camera angle of that fight, so it could have been them.
Yeah.
I mean,
They did have like the laser guidance system on it though, so that
Yeah.
might have been that instead.
I mean,
Yeah, they got LiDAR. Plunderbird first, Chomp second.
And
Just
The,
as successful.
and
both spent as much time
Then-
stuck on their side.
it's worth noting that
They both only
in,
really had Series 2 to write home about. That was it.
yeah, apparently in the pits backstage, another example of Robot Wars' incredibly bad safety standards. They had the flipper running backstage, and it threw Adam Clark's featherweight robot Armadillo 8 foot into the air.
Oh, that's safe. It's good thing that didn't
That
land on.
sounds like good television.
Good thing that didn't land on like one of the kids running round.
It's a good thing that didn't land on Rex Garrett. He could have quit.
What? He could have quit a couple of days earlier than he actually did.
Yes.
Well,
That's the final straw. It doesn't matter if somebody gets stabbed in the leg. If you flip Armadillo on top of me, that's the last straw.
Not Armadillo. Armadillo was something completely
Shit.
different and also shit. This is a just a featherweight.
Do I look like I remember every single machine that Adam Clark made? How many of them are there? 28.
Too many.
I think that's about right. I mean, Facet's
Probably.
run, it basically has terminal ferocity in one flip, and it has the flipper's rite of passage by flipping Matilda, which every decent flipper
Yeah.
has to do. They have to take out Matilda, shunt, or bash.
Yeah,
And
it's got to be done. And the legendary flippers get to take out Dead Metal.
yes,
Which so far only 2 robots have done.
And if you're a really mad lad, you get to gently tip Sakilladot over.
well, Psycho, you mean? No one's Kilowatt.
No.
Kilowatt is still.
I mean,
Apollo has
Apollo
tried.
came very, very close. If it wasn't
Oh,
at the end
God,
of the
imagine-
fight, once it had already used up a lot of its CO2, Apollo could get Kilowatt over at the start of a fight.
perhaps.
Yeah.
Not at the end.
It's just a shame.
Not perhaps.
It's a shame
At the
that
end of the
we won't
fight,
get to see it.
Kilowatt was literally about to go over.
Yeah, it just didn't have the gas to get it all the way. And that's the thing is that it has its first fight is against Terminal Ferocity, and it kills it in one flip because it's Terminal Ferocity and it's a piece of crap.
Yeah, it's more terminal cancer than terminal ferocity.
I mean, fucking look at that thing.
It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah.
It's a turret-looking mess. I don't like it. I'm glad it died. Fortunately, it's a shitbolt that was put out of its misery incredibly quickly, and we didn't have to be drawn through its suffering like T2. Sergeant Meikle.
Yeah,
Dark Destroyer. All from the same heat, I might add.
Yes.
and unfortunately though, in a complete fuck up of the bracket, in my opinion, they put Facet up against Firestorm in round 2.
Yeah, possibly the strongest second round fight of the entire series. A little bit ridiculous, especially considering... Well, at the time, Firestorm, if you were working off seeding, Firestorm might not even be the seed in that heat. You know, it would be Facet.
Yeah, it wouldn't be
so,
because Facet would be the seed because Firestorm's previous
I mean,
pedigree.
if you
was
had 2
Groundhog.
seeds, maybe Firestorm would be the lowest seed.
Dietar.
Like 32
Oh,
or
God.
something.
Dietar, though.
Yeah,
Dietar would
actually,
have been.
so... Yeah.
Oh yeah, but because it wasn't seeded, I do think that putting the two best robots in the heat in the same fight in round 2 was that wasn't a good decision.
Well, I mean,
And unfortunately,
yeah.
it doesn't really stand a chance against Firestorm
Yeah,
because
that's-
it can't right itself.
Yeah.
Also, it's the 3rd series in a row that Dietar has been, you know, just sort of middle of the road in a really strong heat.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think
and it makes it to the final.
the thing about this fight is the reason we said Facet could have gone far is because it is a flipper, and in Series 3, if you are a competent flipper, nothing's got a self-righting mechanism, apart from mostly other flippers. Firestorm happens to not only be one of these other flippers, but arguably the second best in the series. And while
Yeah.
Firestorm can self-right, Facet cannot. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the thing is that Facet was really the better robot in that fight up until the death blow.
I wouldn't say so.
Arguably.
They've both got decent wedges, but Facet's got the worst ground clearance on the sides.
Yeah, but it still managed to get under Firestorm enough, which is something very, very few robots have managed to do. Firestorm's not even flipped a handful of times.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean it gets Firestorm over. It manages to do that, and then but Firestorm can right itself, and Facet can't, and that's all it takes.
Yep.
Yep, that's all you need in this series. No self-rider, job done. What Facet's strength was in the first fight became its undoing in the second.
Well, moving on from Facet, we have a robot that was really it made its mark in Series 3. It made its history. Series 3 is the highlight of this robot, and that is really due to who it ends up defeating. And we are of course talking about Agrobot.
Yes, Agrobot's our favourite Angry Beaver, getting a win over Razor, pretty much the only highlight in its entire robotics career.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And not even by any success of its own. It was more the failure of others that propelled it.
I mean, it manages to knock Matilda's shell off during its fight with Binky, which is another really shitty robot that we're going to be talking about in a couple of days' time.
Yeah, I do wonder if Daisy had actually have been working, if it would have been just as bad as Binky, because Agrobot also sort of just died on its own accord later on in the episode.
I do want to give it... Go on.
Daisy versus Razor could have been hilarious.
I do want to give a quick shout out to Agrobot's via pneumatic spike. A classic early series weapon right there.
It did put holes in Binky, although Binky looked like it was made of paper mache.
Yeah.
How do you... It's like bingo with Series 3. Is it a shit weapon? Yes! Is it rear mounted? Yes! Does it have anything on the front that would stop it from putting the weapon there? No!
Hey,
I just like the fact it beat a robot that was allegedly able to go at 45 miles an hour.
Sure.
And barely moved.
Hey, get it in a race with Facet.
Do you know what they call the weapon on Agrobot? It's called a zonker.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have called it the beaver tail with the creepy beaver look it's going for.
I mean,
zonker works.
I don't want to know where they got the inspiration for that, given the half Hellraiser, half BDSM get up they had for Series 7 for some reason.
Yeah, but yeah, the most famous victory that this thing has is that it happens to be in the arena when Razor breaks down and ends up immobilized, which allows it to make it through to the heat final against Blade, where
it promptly dies. It just sort of drives forward and dies.
One thing in its favour though, for that Razor fight, its sloped sides do fend off Razor for a bit.
It was just putting scratches on the paint job at first, but any time it got around the back.
I mean, if it had a more conventional design, it's possible Razor could have immobilized them before breaking, which then could have seen Razor take the championship.
Yeah, if Agrobot wasn't so much of an absolute unit, it probably would have not put up anywhere close to as good of a fight.
it depends on how quickly into the fight Razor actually breaks down. And honestly, I don't really care to go and.
Really.
Yeah, it took
quite a while for Agrobot to eventually have Razor.
Yeah, but
itself.
is it toward the end because of the editing, or is it towards the end because that's just when the fight stops?
I mean, I think
there's
the editing
lot
would
of
have
time spent.
Editing would have only cut time off.
True, but I mean, and unlike most of the robots we've been discussing here, Agrobot actually came back after its amazing victory over Razor, and then it's seeded 20th for Series 4, and it comes up against Oblivion 2 and Sawpoint, where Oblivion 2 dies when Sawpoint drives over it.
It's really an emphatic showing of why the seeding system shouldn't have just been, if this machine didn't embarrass itself last year, give it a seed.
Hey, when you're trying to come up with 32 seeds in a 96 robot competition, you got to scrape the bottom. You got to scrape the bottom of the barrel a bit. Agrobot.
They're the Razor killers. They should have been seeded like 3rd or 4th.
Yeah, and then it comes up against Smidsy, where it gets picked up, piggybacked around the arena for a while, its wheels catch fire, and
It's an impressive way to go out.
Yeah.
yeah. This is a fight that actually sticks out to me just from my days of watching Series 4 when it originally aired. I always remembered Smidzy just utterly dominating Agrabot.
Yeah. After Series 4, it showed up in various guises. It appeared in Extreme 6 and 7, largely sticking to a kind of wedge shaped with a rear crusher of some sort, and shout out in Extreme to its weird lifting mechanism that lifts it up by a little thin arm lifting the entire rest of the robot up.
I am impressed that Agrobot managed to just keep consistently qualifying time after time.
Well, it didn't.
Despite the fact it didn't win a single one-on-one fight from there on out.
It
just
failed
kept
to
winning in
qualify for
melees.
Series 5.
Oh, well then.
Yeah.
It gets. I mean, it gets in its Extreme 1 appearance. It appears in one fight, a mayhem with Killatron and Splinter, and it arguably loses to Killatron.
Yes.
Well, Splinter's not an awful machine. Splinter's
Yeah, but
okay.
This is Killatron's fight, is the thing.
Yes.
It's really Killatron's fight. It shouldn't have been given to Splinter, but it was.
I don't think we need to go into much more detail on the rest of Agrabot's career.
No,
it's pretty dire. So, but hey,
it gets murdered by Vader, and then it gets murdered by Ripper. Oh no, it manages to survive Ripper and then gets murdered by Reptron II.
But at least they always got one thing to put in the Robot Wars technical manual that made me wonder what, when I read it as a kid for the first time, that they beat Razor.
Yeah, it appeared on Techno Games, and that really doesn't matter at all.
This is
up there with legends like
Inquisitor and
Yeah.
Pussycat. They're the only
might
three to
of
win KO
Inquisitor.
victories.
Inquisitor, Agrobot, Pussycat. The whole
Holy
of
tree.
legends for the sport of robot combat.
Don't forget Killy Cranky.
True.
That is true. That is technically a KO.
Technically,
Killy Cranky, comparatively, about on par in the reboot with the likes of Agrobot in the original run in terms of just success.
I mean, technically, Nuts has a combat victory over Razor, but
Yeah.
you know.
Moving on, last but not least, Berserk 2, or as they were shown in the introductions, Bezek 2.
Yes, ending this episode on really a relative highlight. Berserk 2 was pretty tough. It was built out of aluminum alloy, which, as we'll see, stood up pretty well to a certain spinny thing.
Pardon me, did you just say aluminum?
Yes, aluminum used to build robots such as
No.
ROCS.
There is another I in that word.
It's aluminium.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually correct.
Berserk 2 was a sequel to a super heavyweight competitor in Series 2, which honestly they could have just called it Berserk. No one would have remembered. And
Nobody cared about
one
that.
interesting tidbit is basically the whole team, apart from one interpreter, was deaf. Which leads to
Yeah, and the entire
Yeah.
time the interpreter looked like he didn't want to be there.
Yes, but it led to some charming interviews with Philippa.
Yeah, that is true.
Berserk 2 had an axe and a rear lifter in there. In its first two fights, it makes very good use of these lifters.
Yeah, it does.
Against Struts Revenge, it KOs it by turning it over, and against Alligator, which honestly, Alligator is arguably an underrated machine that could have easily done well. It's got a good round. It's got a very good
It actually
run
put up a
clearance.
very good showing against Berserk at first. It had it on the ropes for a while.
Yeah.
Nearly had it in the pit at one point. Close enough,
Yeah.
anyway. It was pushing it, getting under it. But then the lack of invertibility was its undoing.
And that and the fact it wasn't really able to capitalise on its pushes. Like, it gets Berserk over
there
to
wasn't
shunt.
really a weapon to go with the wedge that could
No.
have done something to get Berserk over. If they just had a little lifter, if they decided to just make it like an inch shorter so it could be invertible, it could have been a serious threat. Well, serious threat, it probably would have lost immediately to Hypnodisc in the next round, but...
Hey, it
could have been
could
a
have played
finalist.
Spinner Killer. It could have played Spinner Killer.
It had that original Sin tier front wedge, you know. Just point it at Hypnodisc until Hypnodisc breaks.
Now, the Heat final, where Berserk 2 encounters Hypnodisc, is it's quite an interesting one. Certainly one that's inspired a lot of discussion over whether or not Berserk 2 should have taken this. Now, I was thinking we could between the three of us try and use the original criteria to try and figure out who we think should have won this.
I think it's Hypnodisc.
I think Hypnodisc as well. Obviously, when the tiebreaker is damage, I think Hypnodisc had damage and aggression. I think Style and Control would have went to Berserk because they were quite controlled. They managed to keep Hypnodisc's weapon pinned down and at low speed for a lot of the fight. But when damage is the tiebreaker, you got to go Hypnodisc.
Yeah, I think the thing where Berserk 2 loses points is that it gets flipped over and then is put back onto its wheels by Hypnodisc.
Important that you specify gets back on its wheels, because a lot of people's memory of this seems to be that Berserk 2 gets flipped and that's it, but no, it doesn't get righted.
Yeah, and I think at the point where you're relying on your opponent to self-right, you are losing.
Yeah, but that wasn't the case in Blade versus Agent Orange earlier. So
hey, personally,
does depend on how the fight goes.
I think neither really gets damaged because Hypno, who up until now has been tearing robots apart, basically doesn't even tear.
I still think it does put a couple of, even a little bit of, a couple of dents is still more damage than Berserk was managing.
It's not really visible. It's not really visible damage or striking damage. I think Hypno has the edge on aggression because it is constantly going in for more attacks and drives on Berserk. Control, neither's driven too well. I think the floor spike does count against it. And Style,
I think Control you still give to Berserk because a lot of the time Berserk was managing to keep Hypnodisc's weapons slowed down because Hypnodisc obviously couldn't drive and spin up at the same time back then.
Yeah, but how much of that is just Hypno's weapon slowing down upon contact with Berserk?
Well, a lot of that as well is that Berserk, once it got hit, it was still backing up into Hypnodisc and trying to push it and stopping it from spinning up.
I think on Style it's obvious who wins.
Around the back of it as well, like it was reversing into Hypnodisc's back, so the spinner just was a non-factor a lot of the time. I think it was a decent enough performance, Control and Style-wise, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
I was going to say, I think on Style, I think it's pretty obvious who the judges would plumb for.
Yeah, it's hard. It's Hypnodisc is another case of one of those robots that's just always going to win the Style category, and that's why the Style category being gone is a good thing.
Especially in Series 3, where it's basically the first of its kind. But this fight has also led to Berserk 2 getting perhaps a bit overrated. One particularly amusing example being a YouTube comment. I'm not sure what it was on exactly, but someone positing that Carbide could have been defeated by Berserk 2 with a wedge.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, where would Berserk 2 have put that wedge is up to your discretion.
Hey, that extra 30 kilograms, slam Original Sins on there, good as gold.
Just double up the armor, extra thick layer.
Yeah, and obviously it's up there with of course Victor 2 for robots from Series 3.
Yeah, Victor 2 of course
Carbide.
could beat Carbide as we've discussed earlier.
Yes. All you need to beat Carbide is just a good armored wedge or a flail spinner. It doesn't matter what quality you have as long as you have one of those two ingredients.
Hell, with the extra,
better yet, have both.
With the extra 30 kilograms, Victor 2 could have a giant wedge, and that would be its way to beat Carbide.
Exactly.
So yeah, Berserk 2, a very good competitor, and that has a really baffling downgrade in Series 4.
Yeah, they could have really just brought back the Series 3 one and probably done just as well.
Yeah. Everything about it that made it a credible threat, they sort of just made it worse.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't help that its second round opponent was Tornado.
Tornado's going to make everybody.
They weren't going to win that one either way, but
well, they nearly beat Hypnodisc. They could nearly beat Tornado.
It really is just worse in every way. Its armor is pitiful. Kill-a-Lot does basically go right through it in its fight against Tornado, and it even looks worse. Like the original Berserk 2 it had that striking kind of front design.
It had the jaws.
Yeah, it had the jaws.
Yeah.
It had the cool looking kind of like untreated steel. This one looks like smooth, and it's got this horrible shade of silver.
It just looked like painted metal.
It
looks
cheap.
Didn't even paint it in interesting color. It was just painted with silver, PVA acrylic paint, the kind you'd use in your primary school art class.
One thing in their favour, though, in their interview, they do indicate that they only had 1 week to prepare, which indicates to me this might have been built in a week. So,
I believe it.
Yeah,
I would believe it.
There's nothing really to say about its fight against Inverted Banda Creature. What's of interest is its fight against Tornado, which Tornado already showing that it's a force to be contended with by just mopping the floor with Berserk. Like this
isn't really a fight.
Yeah, the same machine that's kind of got its reputation by standing up to Hypnodisc is being brutalized by this Rambot. Like Tornado's spikes Tornado's little nub spikes on its front are actually making holes in Berserk.
Yeah. Series 4 Tornado is my favourite Tornado.
Let's not get into Tornado now, God. We'll need a
Welcome
part two.
to the Tornado Podcast.
Yeah. Oh boy, first episode of Series 6 is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think that's basically the end of Berserk 2, and it's not the end of Team Berserk. They show up in Series 5 of Twister, of which the less said, the better, I think.
Well, Twister is a legendarily bad robot.
Yeah.
So bad that people actually petitioned for it to be replaced with the Series 3 version of Berserk 2 in a couple of randomized tournaments. And we didn't go for that.
Tempting as it was.
It's most infamous for losing a fight to Claude Hopper.
Yes,
it actually lost a fight to a Walker bot.
Giving a Walker
that wasn't Drillzilla.
Giving the only non-anarchy Walker to have a victory in the main competition, I believe.
And I like that Twister was so bad that they came back next year as literally Pussycat.
Yeah, their Series 6 qualification attempt is literally just Pussycat without the blade.
I think on that note, I think that is a good enough note to end things on today.
Yeah, that's kind of about where we need to stop with this robot.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming on, Matt. It was nice to have you on.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Your wonderful professional audio setup, I'm sure, will sound even more stunning against mine and Dan's. Tune in next time where we will be covering the shitbots of Series 3, and hoo boy, is that going to be a fun one. We will be having we will, however, have a special...
Yes, we're having a crossover with a good podcast.
Hey, our podcast is plenty good, I'll have you know. We are at least in the top 10 Robot Wars podcasts. How many there are, I'm not sure.
On that note, everybody, post in the comments who you think the 10 robots chosen to be in the next episode, the Shitbots episode, will be.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Give us what you think of the 10 worst machines and see how they stack up with ours.
Yes.
Well, we should specify 10 worst machines that move. We are going to have a separate thing to talk about all the round 1 dropouts that couldn't fucking drive.
Yes. Until then...
That would be too